There's a lot more that I need to share with you about Project 2025. Today I'm going to talk about housing discrimination and how Project 2025 will enable lots more housing discrimination. Stay with me. Hello, everybody. I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. And each and every week, we bring you at least one legal analysis of some story trending regarding politics, policies, personalities, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy this unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. If that interests you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell. Project 2025 is not going anywhere unless we do everything we got to do to prevent Trump from getting reelected. But if he is reelected, then what we'll be facing is much more housing discrimination because of Project 2025. I'm going to break all that down for you. But before I do, please go over to Amazon, get a copy of my book, Education Injustice, if you have a black son or sons in a public school. Also, if your black son in public school is not reading at grade level, we created a program we call BARS. BARS, we designed to help your son get his reading level up to grade level, at least increase it a level over the summer. But you need to get enrolled quickly because the summer is going away pretty quickly. We're already at the midpoint of July, and the program ends the 1st of September. So go over to our website and enroll or register your son. Hey everyone, I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Recently, I took a look at our analytics and I noticed something shocking. Many of you watch our videos and I believe you enjoy them, but you haven't subscribed yet. What are you waiting for? Again, I was shocked because I know our content is empowering and informative. Plus, our 2024 goal is to have 150,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Please help us by hitting that subscribe button, especially you young folks. We particularly want to increase our number of young subscribers. Thanks for all your continued support. We appreciate it very much. Yes, so housing discrimination will dramatically increase if Donald Trump is reelected because Project 2025 lays out exactly why housing discrimination will increase. Now, I'm going to walk you through this. So let's go to another screen. Project 2025 will enable housing discrimination. Now, housing discrimination is a huge issue for the African American community. So let's look at this Habitat for Humanity article, and it sort of lays out why housing discrimination is such a big thing for black people. Although systemic racism existed in America for hundreds of years before the 20th century, the policies of the past 100 years have been incredibly destructive to people of color, especially black individuals, who have been denied the opportunity to build a better life for themselves and their families due to historic discrimination in U.S. housing policy. Too many among the general public aren't aware that the egregious racial disparities in the U.S. that exist today in education, employment, health, and wealth are linked to black families' exclusion from opportunities to purchase an affordable home and live in non-segregated neighborhoods. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Most African American people have their wealth in their home equity. Now, white people, Asians, they have a more diversified portfolio typically. So they have stocks, they have bonds, they have mutual funds, 401ks, other types of instruments, including rental properties and so on. But the average African American person has most of their wealth tied up in their home. which is why during the 2008-2009 Great Recession, blacks suffered a huge loss in wealth because many of the foreclosures were of African American families. So it's really important that we do everything we can to eliminate housing discrimination, because not only does it provide a roof over our heads, it becomes the place where we build wealth. So housing discrimination can be extremely bad for the average African American family. So that's what Habitat for Humanity is trying to communicate here. Between 1934 and 1962, just to give you an example, households of color received just 2% of all government-backed mortgages, severely impacting their long-term economic mobility. When black parents were denied pathways to affordable home ownership, it affected their ability to set up future generations for success. Well, why is that? Because it is from your wealth. You can educate your children without student loans. You can create businesses to bring in more wealth and income. You can pay off debt. But if you're not a homeowner and you have no equity, then you typically have no wealth, unless, of course, you got wealth in other instruments or wealth in other ways, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc. But as I said already several times, most black people have their wealth in their home equity. So being forbidden to buy homes because of housing discrimination, again, is a really bad thing for us as African Americans. Now, in the 60s, the nation took a giant step forward to eradicating housing discrimination. So let's go back to the screen here. The Fair Housing Act. Dr. King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, and President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, FHA, Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 into law on April 11th, 1968. So 1 week after Dr. King's assassination, President Johnson signed into law the FHA, the Fair Housing Act. The FHA is a pivotal law for African Americans for the reasons I've already given you. Congress tasked the Housing and Urban Development with the responsibility of enforcing the FHA and gave HUD two main duties. Now, I want you to pay very close attention here. The first duty of HUD is to eliminate discrimination in the sale or rental of housing and other prohibited practices. That is 42 U.S.C. Section 3604. This is a federal statute. Now, eliminating discrimination in the sale or rental of housing and other prohibited practices. Let's just think about that for a second. Let's suppose you're in the market to buy or sell a house, but you're being discriminated against. You have the money to buy the house. You have picked out the neighborhood you think is right for you and your family, neighborhood that has good schools, etc. But because of your skin color, because of your race, you can't buy the house. That was the situation that we were in prior to the Fair Housing Act. It is the reason today that many of us live in neighborhoods that we could never have lived in just like 70, 80 years ago. Our parents, for example, couldn't live in those neighborhoods. Certainly our grandparents couldn't. So the Fair Housing Act is a critical piece of legislation that we don't need anyone messing with, including Project 2025. So the very first thing that the Fair Housing Act does is prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, gender, and some other things. But that's not all it does. It also imposes a duty on HUD to affirmatively promote fair housing. Now that's really important. Not only does HUD have the duty of fighting and prohibiting, eliminating housing discrimination, but HUD also has the affirmative duty to promote fair housing. And that means that HUD has to be proactive, has to be aggressive. It has to seek out and find instances, patterns, and practices of housing discrimination, and not just wait for African American people to file complaints, but to be using its resources to be seeking out those entities that are being discriminatory in their housing decisions and housing policies. That is a really, really big part of the Fair Housing Act, not only to fight discrimination, but to affirmatively promote fair housing. Again, not just waiting for somebody to file a complaint, but to be affirmatively going out into the nation and identifying discriminatory practices and patterns and getting rid of those. That's a key provision of the Fair Housing Act. All right. Yet, despite the FHA's stated goals, housing discrimination continued. Changing or enacting laws didn't change hearts. For example, the DOJ sued former President Trump, his father, and their company for housing discrimination against African Americans in the 70s. I mean, just a couple of years after the enactment of the Fair Housing Act. Specifically, Trump's company refused to rent apartments to African Americans. The evidence in the case was very strong, and it caused Trump to settle the case. But he was one of many bad actors in the area of housing discrimination. So this discrimination was going on despite the two primary duties of the FHA, of the Fair Housing Act. One, eliminate discrimination, and two, to affirmatively seek out discrimination so that fair housing can become a regular practice in the country. So that was the state of housing policies for many years, even after the passing of the Fair Housing Act. A lot of discrimination continued, just like what we saw with Trump. All right, in 2015, to give strength and direction to HUD's duty of affirmatively furthering fair housing, the Obama administration developed the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. Among other things, it required local governments, public housing agencies, and other recipients of federal housing funds to identify and address barriers to fair housing by creating an equity plan. So, with this new rule in place in 2015, now that affirmative duty of HUD was not just some words in a statute. There was now a rule that Obama put in place. By the way, this is just one of many examples of the specific things that Obama did for African Americans, which negates this commonly repeated lie in the African American community that Obama did nothing directly to help black people. It is a lie. That is false. That is incorrect. This is one of many initiatives that the Obama administration did to help black Americans. All right, so this rule required that anyone who received HUD money had an affirmative duty to promote fair housing practice. That was now a rule. If you want the money, if you want the federal dollars, if you need the money to build houses, to develop land, to build apartments, whatever you needed the money for related to housing, you had to submit this equity plan, which showed how you were going to use that money to combat housing discrimination. I mean, it's a great, great, great rule, right? Just an awesome rule. Now, equity plan. We know how white conservatives hate equity. The word equity just gets under their skin. Yet the AFFH rule required it under the Obama administration. Conservatives still hated it and fought it. And they were able to eliminate the rule. How did that happen? Well, we know exactly how that happened. Donald Trump was elected. The same Donald Trump who had discriminated against blacks in the 70s. he became the president of the United States of America. He appointed Ben Carson over HUD. Carson eliminated Obama's AFFH rule and replaced it with his weak version. Without this rule, the FHA was once again ineffective at combating old and new forms of housing discrimination. It pains me that Carson, an African-American man, could help Trump eliminate a rule that strengthened the Fair Housing Act. Now just think about that for a second. It was the assassination of Dr. King that sparked and caused Lyndon Johnson to go ahead and sign the Fair Housing Act into law. That was 1 week after King's assassination. And now, decades later, another African-American man under Donald Trump does something to weaken the Fair Housing Act. Again, that just pains me, but it is what it is. Trump unleashed a racist attack on the AFFH rule via X, formerly Twitter. Now here's what he said. He says, "I'm happy to inform all of the people living their suburban lifestyle dream that you will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low-income housing built in your neighborhood." Well, let's go back and interpret that. I am happy to inform all of the white people living their suburban lifestyle dream that you will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low-income black housing built in your neighborhood. That's the way I read that. This was a racist trope. This was a dog whistle to white suburban families that I have prevented black low-income people from coming into your neighborhood. All right, he goes on to say, your housing prices will go up based on the market and crime will go down. I have rescinded the Obama-Biden AFFH rule. Enjoy. That's just flat out racism. It makes the assumption that low-income people who are trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps will also bring crime into the community. It's just a stereotype. And again, we hear that dog whistle. It doesn't mention race, but we hear it. We know it's there, right? We're not idiots. We're not fools. We know what he was doing with those two tweets, unfortunately. Anyway, Trump got rid of that AFFH rule, which again imposed a duty on HUD to ensure that folks that got HUD money was affirmatively out there fighting housing discrimination. Getting rid of that rule was a huge setback. All right. But something else happened in 2020, and that is the election of Joe Biden. And Biden re-implemented Obama's AFFH rule, but unfortunately, the rule has not completely been released by the Biden administration. And it was just a month or so ago that civil rights leaders recently encouraged Biden to fully release the rule. Now, why that hasn't happened, I don't know. Some folks think that Biden is waiting for re-election. Others think that it's because the former secretary, Marcia Fudge, is no longer with the agency. So there are all kinds of speculations as to why the rule hasn't been fully released by Joe Biden after about 3 years now. Well, there's another reason why the rule potentially hasn't been released is because the House is dominated by the GOP and it is fighting the reestablishment of the AFFH rule. Let me show you that. This piece of legislation, which is dated July 10th, the committee approves fiscal year 25 Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Act. And if you look down at the highlighted text, the act supports American values and principles by preventing implementation of the administration's proposed affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which would put a severe regulatory burden on small and medium-sized municipalities, public housing authorities, and other entities, and bury them in developing equity plans. You see, they got equity plans in quotations because we know how bad they hate the word equity. Anything that might give African Americans a leg up, they're fighting it. That is the GOP that we're dealing with right now. So they are actively fighting the reimplementation of this rule in Congress. That, again, is a potential reason why Biden hasn't released the rule fully. Now, even if he were to release the rule immediately, Project 2025 stands in the wings to repeal the rule immediately, on site, basically. Now, how do we know that? Well, let's look at some language from Project 2025. And this language was written by none other than Ben Carson. He says, and I quote, HUD political leadership should immediately assign all delegated powers to politically appointed PDAS, DAS, and other office leadership positions. Change any current career leadership positions into political and non-career appointment positions and use senior executive service transfers to install motivated and aligned leadership. That's page 508. So what he's saying there is gut the bureaucracy of HUD and replace it with Trumpsters. So that's one of the reform efforts that Project 2025 promotes. And they're able to do that legally now because of the Chevron case, right? Which gives the president the authority to basically gut federal agencies and to replace the bureaucracy, the employees, the career employees of federal agencies with his political appointees. So they can do that day one. Day one. So that's the first thing that Ben Carson said here that is very problematic and troubling regarding HUD policies. Then he goes on to say, the secretary should initiate a HUD task force consisting of politically appointed personnel to identify and reverse all actions taken by the Biden administration to advance progressive ideology. So Ben Carson is fully against progressive ideology, an ideology that is the reason why he was able to attend a white medical school. It is the reason why he's able to live in probably a predominantly white community. In other words, many of the things that Ben Carson and all of us African Americans enjoy is the result of progressive ideology. The Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, the Voting Rights Act, and many other rights that we have under the Constitution have been championed by progressive ideology. So it's unfortunate, again, that an African American man would stand in opposition to all progressive ideology. Now, of course, there's some progressive ideology that I too don't agree with. But when it comes to race, when it comes to racial equality, progressive ideology has been the only thing that we've had, because conservative ideology has opposed racial equality vigorously. And obviously, Ben Carson is with that crowd. Such a sad, sad thing. Again, it pains me. Anyway, Carson goes on to say, and here we have it, repeal the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing AFFH regulation reinstituted under the Biden administration and any other uses of special purpose credit authorities to further equity. How can this black man be against equity? I mean, how can he do that in his heart, in his soul? It's baffling. Equity is a good word for African Americans. He is the beneficiary of equity. The work that Dr. King and many others did to obtain equity at some level, Ben Carson benefits from it. And yet, he stands in opposition to equity now that he is doing very, very, very well. Anyway, Project 2025 will get rid of the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing rule or regulation. And that will essentially allow housing discrimination to just go unchecked, because it's not enough just to prohibit discrimination. We need folks who receive HUD dollars to be affirmatively furthering fair housing, not sitting back waiting for people to complain, but those entities that receive HUD dollars, they need to be out there ensuring that everyone is being treated fairly. Well, Ben Carson wrote in Project 2025 that rule should be gotten away with. It should not be a part of the HUD duties. That's unfortunate, but that is the way it is. And that is the reason why I keep coming back to you and talking to you about Project 2025. It is filled with many anti-Black policies. And it is the reason why we must vote, 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 vote to keep Joe Biden in office, because Project 2025 is horrible, especially for us African Americans. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Thank you for tuning in, and until the next video, peace.